The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Claire Navarro had been asleep for exactly 43 minutes, which was the longest uninterrupted sleep she had managed in 3 days because the DeLuca account was hemorrhaging, and her firm's senior partner had decided that hemorrhaging accounts were Claire's problem specifically, and Claire had been treating them as such with the focused intensity of someone who had once treated significantly larger problems with significantly less sleep in significantly worse conditions. But she did not think about that. She had not thought about that in 8 years. She had a mortgage and a daughter and a job that required her to exist entirely in the present tense, which was, she had decided, the correct way to live. The phone showed Sophie's number. Sophie was 16. Sophie did not call at 2:17 in the morning. Sophie communicated primarily through a series of brief text messages and the occasional appearance in the kitchen for food, which was developmentally appropriate and which Claire had been told by 3 separate parenting books to interpret as a sign of healthy independence rather than impending disaster. She answered before the second ring completed. What she heard was not Sophie. It was a man's voice, unhurried, with the particular unhurriedness of someone who had made calls like this before and understood that time, in this context, belonged entirely to them. He said Sophie's name. He said a number. He said the words "by Friday," and "do not contact police," and "we know your schedule," and then he said a name that Claire had not heard spoken aloud in 8 years, a name that was not Claire Navarro and had never appeared on any document connected to her current life, a name that 3 governments and 1 entity that operated between governments had spent considerable resources trying to ensure remained permanently unspoken. He said, "The Phantom." The call lasted 41 seconds. She counted them. After it ended, she sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for 19 seconds. She was not frozen. She was processing, which looked like the same thing from the outside, but was categorically different on the inside. The difference between a system that has crashed and a system running a very large calculation. She had done this in a safe house in Naples with a fractured wrist and no communications equipment. She had done it in the back of a moving vehicle in Odessa, with her hands zip-tied and 2 broken ribs. She had done it in a black site in a country she was officially never in, sitting across from a man who was officially never there either, with a decision to make that would never appear in any document and could never be undone. 19 seconds. Then she stood up and went to the closet. The closet of Claire Navarro, financial analyst, single mother, owner of 2 wool blazers and a collection of sensible flats, had a back panel that was not original to the house. It had been installed 7 years ago by Claire herself over the course of a single weekend while Sophie, then 9, was at her grandmother's, using tools she had purchased in cash from 3 different hardware stores and skills she was not supposed to still have. Behind the panel, a waterproof case sealed, a go bag, packed and rotated every 6 months. A phone, not her phone, a number that connected to a network that had officially ceased to exist and unofficially had never stopped. She opened the case. Inside, documentation she would not need yet. A sidearm she had cleaned and checked every month for 7 years without firing it. 2 additional magazines, a folding blade, a medical kit that contained things not available in standard medical kits, a photograph of Sophie at age 7 standing in front of the ocean with both arms out, printed on paper rather than stored digitally, because some things you kept on paper. She held the photograph for 4 seconds. Then she put it in the interior pocket of the jacket she was already pulling on. She picked up the secondary phone. It rang twice before it was answered. The voice that answered it belonged to a man who had not slept a full night in approximately 11 years, and who Claire had last spoken to 8 years ago in a parking garage in Zurich, where she had told him she was done, and he had told her he understood, and they had both known that understanding and done were not the same thing as permanent. "Raise," she said. A pause of 3 seconds, which was Rise processing the fact that this call was happening. Then, "Where?" Not a question, an operational inquiry. "DeLuca," she said. "Milan family. They have Sophie." She heard him move, heard the particular sounds of a man shifting from whatever he had been doing into something else entirely. How long? Call came in 43 minutes ago. They said Friday. That's 62 hours. They used the name. Yes. Silence for 2 seconds. That's how they found you. Someone sold the connection. I know. She was already moving through the apartment, checking windows, the specific choreography of someone conducting an environmental threat assessment of a space they have lived in for 4 years and are now looking at for the first time with the correct eyes. It doesn't matter right now. What matters is Sophie. Claire, don't. She said it without heat. Just tell me what you have on the DeLuca Milan operation currently. He told her. She listened without interrupting. The DeLuca family had been restructuring their European operation for 18 months. New leadership. A nephew named Enzo DeLuca, 38, who had spent 4 years in a Swiss business school and come back with ideas about efficiency and vertical integration that the older family members found distasteful and the law enforcement community found concerning. They had moved into financial leverage as a primary tool, which meant they needed leverage, which meant they needed someone specific to have done something specific that they could use. Except they had not found the something specific on Claire Navarro, so someone with access to older and deeper records had sold them something older and deeper instead. Someone had sold them the Phantom. They think that name is leverage, she said. It is leverage, Rise said carefully. It's a targeting error, she said. They think they're holding a hostage to control an asset. They don't understand what the asset is. A pause. You've been out for 8 years. Yes. Claire, 8 years is. Rise. She stopped at the window and looked at the street below without standing directly in the light. Have I ever been 8 years away from what I am, or have I been 8 years away from what I do? She som better under the phone. Or have I been 8 years away from what I do? She dare, and the taffer. However, I'm out. Had I been another. In Devil's City. Again. What ye sent him of. A longer pause this time. What do you need? He said. She told him. The DeLuca Milan operation maintained 4 primary properties in the greater Milan metropolitan area and 2 outside it. Reyes had current surveillance on 2 of the city properties because the entity he worked for, which had no name that appeared in any budget, had been building a financial crimes case for 6 months. Sophie would not be in either of the surveilled properties because the family was not stupid enough to keep a hostage where they suspected observation. That left 4 properties, 2 of which were flagged in Rise's system as high probability for sensitive operations based on traffic pattern analysis from the previous 8 weeks. She was on a flight in 3 hours. She used a passport that did not belong to Claire Navarro. Going through the airport, she looked like what the passport said she was, mid-level pharmaceutical sales representative, traveling for a regional conference. She had the conference materials to prove it, printed and annotated with the specific authentic-looking wear of documents actually used. She had done this long enough that the construction of a plausible surface was not something she planned. It was something she simply produced, the way a musician produces music, below the level of deliberate thought. On the plane she slept for 90 minutes. Precisely 90 minutes. She had been able to do this for as long as she could remember, designate a period of time, sleep it, wake at its completion without an alarm, fully present. It was useful. It was also one of the things that had told her, early in her life, that she was going to end up doing something other than what most people did. She landed in Milan at 11:40 in the morning. Reyes had a contact there, a woman named Giulia who operated out of a camera repair shop in the Navigli district and who provided intelligence and equipment to 3 different entities simultaneously with the serene double-dealing professionalism of someone who had decided that loyalty was for people with fewer operational expenses. Claire did not trust her fully. She trusted her adequately, which was the only kind of trust that survived contact with this world intact. Giulia gave her current vehicle registrations on 2 of the 4 properties, a map overlay of camera positions in the surrounding streets, and a case that contained equipment Claire had specified. She also gave her, without being asked, a coffee, which Claire drank in full because she needed it, and because Giulia had been doing this long enough to understand that the people who came to her camera repair shop needed coffee. The first property was a villa outside the city, east, 40 minutes. Claire did a drive-by first, then a pedestrian pass on the perimeter road, then a static observation from a position in an olive grove to the northeast for 40 minutes. She was looking for specific things: guard rotation, light patterns, whether the perimeter was optimized for keeping people out or keeping people in, which were different configurations that required different approaches. It was optimized for keeping people in. Sophie was there. She did not know this with certainty. She knew it with the specific quality of operational instinct that was not instinct at all but pattern recognition, so deeply embedded that it produced certainty without the intermediate steps of conscious analysis. The configuration of the property said Sophie was there. The positioning of the interior lights said Sophie was there. The fact that one of the 3 guards she had counted was positioned at the northeast corner facing inward rather than outward, watching something inside the perimeter rather than watching the road, said Sophie was specifically and exactly there. She spent the next 4 hours building the complete picture. 3 exterior guards, rotating on a 90-minute cycle, which meant the rotation had been designed by someone who understood guard fatigue but not guard predictability, because a 90-minute cycle was long enough that the last 20 minutes of each rotation produced observable degradation in attention. 2 interior guards that she could identify by light and shadow movement through the ground floor windows. The northeast wing of the villa had a room on the upper floor with a light that had not changed position or quality in 3 hours. The specific static light of a lamp left on in a room where someone was being kept, rather than the variable light of a room being used. She ate one of the protein bars from the go bag and drank half a bottle of water, and did not think about Sophie in the room with the static light because thinking about it in a way that produced feeling was a resource expenditure she could not afford for another 4 hours, and she had learned a very long time ago to make that choice cleanly rather than partially, because partial was what got people killed. She moved at 3:15 in the morning. The northeast corner guard was at minute 71 of his rotation. She had 11 minutes before the cycle turned. She moved along the exterior wall from the south approach, which the camera configuration covered least completely, and she moved in the specific way she moved in these situations, which was the way water moves, finding the path, occupying the space, leaving no turbulence. The guard at the northeast corner heard nothing. He then experienced a loss of consciousness with a duration she had calibrated. He would wake up with a headache and a damaged professional reputation and no other permanent consequences, which was more consideration than several people who had made choices about tonight deserved. She was over the wall in 4 seconds. The interior of the villa's ground floor she had mapped from the window observations. She moved through it with the lights off and her eyes adjusted, which took 11 minutes to full adjustment, and which she had begun in the olive grove, sitting in the dark, letting her vision shift, the way she had taught herself to shift it, in a training facility that no longer existed in a country that no longer existed in the same configuration. She knew where the interior guards were. She moved in the spaces between where they were. The first interior guard she encountered in the corridor outside the kitchen. He was doing what guards did at 3:20 in the morning after several hours of nothing happening, which was existing in the specific diminished state of someone whose alertness had been worn smooth by boredom, and he was looking at a phone, and Claire was behind him, and then the corridor was quiet. The second interior guard was more complicated because he was positioned at the base of the staircase in a configuration that covered both approaches, which meant someone with real knowledge had placed him. She spent 4 minutes in the shadow of the dining room doorway watching him establish his pattern, and then she moved in the window of the pattern and the staircase was clear. The upper floor. Northeast wing. 3rd door. She did not breach it loudly. She used the lock, which took her 40 seconds, and a tool from the medical kit that was not intended for locks but worked adequately, and then she opened the door quietly and stepped inside and closed it behind her. Sophie was sitting on a bed against the far wall with her knees drawn up and her arms around them, and her face turned toward the door with the expression of someone who has been waiting for something, and is not certain whether the something that just arrived is the thing they were waiting for or something worse. She was 16 years old, and she had her father's dark hair and Claire's eyes, and she was wearing the clothes she had been wearing when they took her, which meant she had been taken quickly and without preparation, and she was frightened and she was angry and she was, Claire could see immediately, physically unharmed. "Mom," Sophie said. Not a question, not surprise. The particular tonality of someone who has been in the dark for many hours imagining various outcomes, and has now arrived at the one they most needed. "I'm here," Claire said. "Are you hurt?" "No." Sophie's voice was steady. She got to her feet. "There are guards." "I know." "I counted at least 5. 6, Claire said. 2 are currently indisposed. We need to move." Sophie looked at her. In the low light from the window, Sophie's face was doing something that Claire recognized because she had seen it in mirrors. The process of updating a model of a person against new information. The particular recalibration of a daughter looking at a mother she believed she understood, and finding something she had not accounted for. "Mom," Sophie said. "Who are you?" Claire crossed the room and put both hands on Sophie's face for 3 seconds, the specific 3 seconds she could afford, and looked at her daughter directly. "I'm your mother," she said. "That's the only answer that matters right now. We're leaving." They moved. Claire took Sophie through the upper floor to a window she had identified during observation as the optimal secondary exit. East face, 12-foot drop to a terrace, manageable. She went first and controlled Sophie's descent, and they were on the terrace and moving along the south perimeter wall in under a minute, Sophie matching her pace with the specific quality of someone who has decided to trust completely and ask questions later. The third exterior guard was coming around the south corner at the wrong moment. He saw them. He raised his weapon and opened his mouth, and Claire closed the distance between them in the time it took his mouth to open, and before any sound came out he was on the ground and Claire was already moving, and Sophie was behind her, and neither of them stopped. They were through the perimeter and into the olive grove and moving east toward the road where Julia's contact had left a vehicle exactly where Ray's had arranged for it to be left. Because Ray's, whatever else he was operationally reliable in the way that people are reliable when they have been doing a thing long enough that reliability has become structural rather than chosen. They drove without speaking for 11 minutes. Sophie sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and looked at the road ahead, and Claire drove in the specific way she drove everything, with the full and exact attention that she gave to the things that mattered. Sophie said, "You planned all of that?" "Yes." "In how long?" "Since the call last night." Sophie was quiet. Then, "How did you know which property?" "Pattern analysis, guard configuration, light placement in the northeast wing." Sophie turned and looked at her profile. "Mom, who are you?" Claire drove. "I mean it," Sophie said. 16-year-old steadiness, which was not a small thing. Claire had always known that, had always watched her daughter's particular quality of steadiness with the specific recognition of someone who saw a familiar architecture in it. "I need to know." Claire was quiet for the length of a curve in the road. Then, "I was someone else for a long time before I was your mother." "Someone else who can do what you just did?" "Yes." "Are you going to tell me what that means?" "I'm going to tell you some of it," Claire said. "When we're somewhere safe and you've slept, I'm going to tell you the parts that help you understand tonight. The rest," she paused, "the rest is mine to carry. That's not something I'm apologizing for. It's just how it is." Sophie looked at her for a long moment. "The men who took me, they said a name, not yours, a different name." Claire said nothing. "They said the Phantom," Sophie said. "They said it like it meant something very specific." "It did," Claire said. "It meant me." Sophie absorbed this. Outside the car, the Italian countryside was dark, and the road was empty, and the headlights moved through it like they were the only light in the world. "Are they going to come after us again?" Sophie asked. "The men who took you are currently experiencing various levels of law enforcement contact that will occupy their complete attention," Claire said. "Rise is making calls. By morning, the family will understand that the leverage they thought they had was not leverage." "Who is Rise?" "Someone I used to work with." "Used to?" "I've been out for 8 years." Sophie looked at the road. "You don't seem like someone who's been out for 8 years." "No," Claire said. I suppose I don't. They found a hotel in a small city 40 minutes from the villa, the kind of hotel that took cash and asked nothing and had a parking lot that could be observed from the room window. Claire paid for 2 nights in the name on the passport. The woman at the desk looked at her with the specifically incurious gaze of someone who had been taking cash from people who needed not to be asked about at 3 in the morning for long enough that it had stopped being interesting. The room had 2 beds and a window that faced the parking lot. Claire checked the window and the door and the ventilation access while Sophie sat on the bed nearest the wall and watched her. You're checking for exits, Sophie said. And entry points, Claire said. Do you do that at home? In our apartment? Claire straightened, looked at her daughter. Yes, she said. Sophie nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing information rather than reacting to it. Claire sat down on the other bed and faced her daughter, and for a moment they were simply 2 people in a room at 4 in the morning, mother and daughter, after something large, and the largeness of it was in the room with them, but so was everything else that was always in the room between them. 16 years of specific ordinary love, the particular currency of a relationship built in kitchens and on school runs, and in the specific intimacy of 2 people sharing a life in an apartment they had made together. I was recruited when I was 22 years old, Claire said, by an organization that I cannot name and which no longer officially exists. I operated for 13 years. The name, the one they used, was an operational designation. It was not a compliment. She paused. I was good at a job that required me to go into places and extract things and do things and make things happen in the specific darkness where governments do not officially operate. I was very good at it. And when I decided I was done with it, I made that decision as completely as I could, and I came home, and I built something that did not have any of that in it. Me, Sophie said. You, Claire said, and the apartment, and the terrible job, and everything ordinary. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Did you know this might happen? That someone might find you? I knew it was possible. I took precautions. The panel in the closet. Claire said nothing for a moment. You knew about the panel. I've known about the panel since I was 12, Sophie said, with the specific composure of someone delivering information they have held for 4 years. I didn't say anything because you didn't say anything, and I decided to wait. Claire looked at her daughter for a long, still moment. You waited 4 years. I figured you'd tell me when you needed to. Sophie pulled her knees up to her chest on the bed, the same position she had been in the room at the villa, and looked at her mother. Did tonight happen because of who you used to be? Yes. Would you go back? If you could. No. Even knowing tonight would happen. Claire thought about this with the full honesty she applied to things that deserved it. I would build the same life, she said, and I would keep the panel in the closet, and I would hope tonight didn't happen, but if it did, I would do what I did tonight. Sophie looked at her with eyes that were Claire's eyes in a face that was doing something beyond 16. Because of me, she said. Because you are the thing worth doing it for, Claire said. Everything else, all of it, all the years in the dark, that had a purpose. The purpose was a life I could have afterward that was worth the cost. You are what that means. You are what it was for. Sophie was quiet for a long time. The hotel room had the particular silence of 4 a.m. in a city that was not home. The specific quality of a moment that both people in it understood will mark something, a before and after, a place in the shared timeline of a relationship that will be referenced differently on either side of it. Mom, Sophie said finally. Yes, the man, in the villa, the third guard. When he saw us, she stopped. Started again with the precision of someone who is going to ask the question correctly or not at all. You moved so fast. I've never seen anything. Another stop. Are you okay? The question arrived in Claire's chest and stayed there. It was Sophie's specific question, the question that was Sophie's alone, the one that asked not what happened or what now, but the one underneath both of those, the one about the person rather than the event. I'm okay, Claire said. I mean it, Sophie said. Actually okay. I know you mean it. Claire looked at her daughter. I'm okay. I'm here. We're both here. She stopped. That's the only thing I was trying to make sure of tonight. Sophie held her gaze for another moment, and then she unfolded herself from the bed and crossed the room and sat down beside her mother and leaned against her shoulder. And Claire put her arm around her daughter, and they sat like that in the hotel room with the parking lot visible through the window, the lot empty and quiet, and watched, and the door secured and the exits mapped, and Sophie's breathing gradually slowing towards something that would eventually become sleep. Claire did not sleep. She watched the parking lot and felt the weight of her daughter against her shoulder, and thought about nothing and everything in the specific way she thought when she was keeping watch, the wide-open attentiveness that held the room and the window and the door and Sophie's breathing all at once, equally, without hierarchy. Without hierarchy. Rise called at 6:40 in the morning. She answered without waking Sophie, stepping to the corner of the room, voice low. It's done, he said. The family's council has been in contact with the relevant parties since 5 a.m. They've been given a clear understanding of what was taken from that property last night and what it represents and what happens next, if anyone associated with that name experiences anything other than complete peace going forward. What the only way let them name an experience is anything other than complete peace going forward. Efbik and blavet. Ebor, upward. Tika, latin mapullet. Tiro was, pet, if topo. Baho. Wait, Rawa, as mos, prayer. This mean no. Yeah. And they believe it. They pulled the surveillance on your apartment 40 minutes ago, he said. They believe it. She was quiet for a moment. Who sold the connection? Who gave them the name? A pause. We're working on that. Raise. We have a lead. It's being addressed. She accepted this because addressed was as complete a word as she was going to get, and because Raise understood, without her saying so, what addressed needed to mean. We'll need new documentation, she said. Both of us. Already in process. 48 hours. And the apartment. Clean, he said. We swept it last night after you left. Nothing was left behind by them. You can go home. Home. The word had the specific weight of things that are earned rather than given, and Claire had earned it in the most literal possible sense, in rooms in Naples and Odessa and Tbilisi, and a dozen other places that no longer existed in any official record, and she carried it with the same steadiness she carried everything, which was to say completely, and without complaint, and with the clear-eyed understanding that it was worth every unit of cost it had extracted. Thank you, she said. Claire. Ray's voice shifted slightly, the shift of a professional moving briefly into something adjacent to personal. She's okay? She's okay. Good. A pause. You're still the best I've ever seen, for whatever that's worth. It's worth less than it used to be, she said, which is the correct direction. She hung up. She went back to the bed and sat beside her sleeping daughter and watched the parking lot lighten as the sun came up over the city, the Italian morning arriving with the specific gold quality of mornings in places with long history, unhurried, indifferent to the previous night, carrying only the present. Sophie woke at 8 and was fully awake immediately, which was a quality Claire recognized and said nothing about. They ate from the vending machine in the corridor, terrible coffee, packaged pastries, the specific breakfast of operational necessity, and Sophie ate with the appetite of someone who had been frightened for many hours and was now done being frightened and was hungry, which was the correct order and which Claire was grateful for. They drove to the airport in the early afternoon. At the gate, waiting, Sophie looked at her mother and said, "Are we going to talk about this when we're home?" "Yes," Claire said. "Not all of it." "Not all of it," Claire agreed. "But enough that I understand. Enough that you understand the parts that are yours to understand." She looked at her daughter. "The rest I carry. That's not a wall between us. It's just—" She stopped, finding the right word. "Wait," Sophie said. Claire looked at her. "Yes, wait." Sophie nodded. She looked at the gate for a moment, the other passengers, the ordinary orchestration of people going home from places, carrying their ordinary bags and their ordinary concerns and their unknowing ordinary safety. Then she looked back at her mother. "Grandma used to say you were different," Sophie said. "That you were always watching, even when you were just sitting somewhere." She said it like it was a little frightening, and also like it was the thing she trusted most about you. Inawahembro. Shitio. She said it like it was the thing she trusted most about you. Tu receiver hamer hember vistabilitishim. Amostepos. Milfind. Besenmion prininio. Claire said nothing. "I understand that now," Sophie said. "Both parts." The gate opened. They stood up together, and Claire picked up the bag, and Sophie took her hand briefly the way she had not taken her hand since she was small, and then let go, and they walked forward, and Claire walked beside her daughter in the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon in a city that did not know what had happened the night before, and the weight she carried was the same weight it had always been, and she carried it the same way, and it was worth it. It had always been worth it. She had just needed Sophie to be standing beside her to know it all the way down.